Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Policy Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Stephen Mulliner and I'm the chairman. And with me on the dais are Mark Mills, our scrutiny officer, and Georgina, our scrutiny support officer. The first item is apologies and substitutions. Georgina.
Apologies have been received from Councillor George Hess, who has decided to leave the committee. Apologies have also been received from Councillor Joan Hegan, Councillor Peter Nicholson and Councillor George Wilson.
Thank you. I will say that Councillor Hegan is suffering from COVID and was very keen to be here and took part in a briefing earlier in the day by Zoom. So we hope she gets better rapidly.
Mr. Chairman, I'm surprised that there are no substitutes that are attending in their place. Was insufficient notice given?
I suspect that was the reason, yes. Minutes, I'm sorry.
We tried to get a substitute, but the substitute doesn't come to meetings in person and the other ones were too late in the day to get a substitute.
The minutes for the meeting the 23rd of November have been available, I believe.
Numbers.
Are there any comments on those minutes? And if not, maybe take them as correct and I'll sign them later. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest?
None received.
Are there any questions from members of the public?
None received.
Or from members?
None received, but Councillor Seaborn wishes to speak on item 8.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Right, we move to the first of the substantive items, the committee work programme for the following year. I'll hand over to the scrutiny officer, Mr. Mills.
Thank you, Chair. I won't take long on this, but just to say there is a bit of an update on part 1. Good news is we've now received replies to your requests on SIL from Surrey County Council and Surrey Heartlands CCG. I sat in on a discussion that the Surrey Heartlands are having with our planning team, and it does seem like that's been a useful contribution by this committee, having sort of moved that process along, and it does also seem that the CCG is taking that question seriously and, for example, has bought new software to help identify opportunities to bid for SIL and evidence that. So I would suggest keep an eye on that, but leave them to continue with that for now. On part 3, there has been a new recurring item added on hybrid working. If you have any specific questions on that or any of the other recurring items, please do let me know. I'd also say on part 4 on the task and finish groups that the services ONS working group on housing allocations should be finished in time for the March meeting cycle, at which point we won't have any task and finish groups actively ongoing. So if you have ideas for new ones that you might want to explore, please do let me know and I'll work up a proposal for those potentially.
Thank you. Yes, I think we'll discuss the possibility of a working group on the housing revenue account when we come to that item. Thank you very much. If there's nothing more on that, let's move on to
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Martin.
Could I just, regarding the letters that were sent to Surrey County Council and to Surrey Heartlands, a response has been received from Surrey Heartlands. Has that been circulated to the committee yet? And if not, could it be? Maybe I missed it. And also, have we not received a reply from Surrey County Council? If so, are we chasing them?
Sorry, if I may check. Yes, I'll double check the letters. I don't see, they're not in and of themselves particularly interesting, but I can circulate them nonetheless. We've had a reply from Surrey Heartlands CCG and Surrey County Council We are still waiting on one from Frimley CCG. So if anyone has any suggestions for contacts I could chase there, that would be handy.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, in the text here, they said it sounds as if the replies were from Surrey Heartlands. It didn't say Surrey CC, comma, and then Surrey Heartlands. So
thinking about it, it is possible the Surrey County Council one came in since that was circulated.
okay. And just to reinforce your point, Mr. Chairman, I would thoroughly recommend, or thoroughly be very pleased to see the housing revenue account put under greater scrutiny within this committee. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Right, item 7, the General Fund Budget 2022, the medium-term financial plan. And I gather that Mr. Vickers, as Head of Finance and Property, will lead on this item. Over to you, Peter.
Chairman, Rosie, our Financial Services Manager, will actually introduce the item.
Okay, so in front of you, you've got the General Fund Budget 22-23 and the medium-term financial plan for the General Fund. I won't go through the report in great detail. I'm sure you've all had it through the circulation. We have been given informal briefings, so there's been opportunity to ask questions. But just to take you through the key items in this report. So the report sets out the medium-term financial plan for the next 4 years, building in key assumptions that we have made through around the reversal of the COVID impact, inflation on contracts and pay, and the other key item is the fair funding review that we are expecting in the next financial year. It also builds in some known changes that we will be having over the next year and beyond. So government funding for 22-23 is something we have certainty on at this stage, and also some upcoming budget pressures have been built into this MTFP and also budget summary for next financial year. So just to go through the key annexes, the key annex, the first annex, Annex 1, takes you through these 4 years assumptions and details the forecast budget shortfall that we will have over the next 4 years, which is a total of 5.2 million. It also details the measures proposed to help meet some of this budget shortfall and includes some targets for services which have been scrutinised and will be closely monitored throughout the period of the MTFP. Annex 2 then sets out the specific 22-23 budget year, and there are details of the movements on this budget in Annex 3. Then Annex 4 is the fees and charges. The capital programme and proposed funding are Annex 5, which the key item there is around the revenue contribution to that capital programme, which impacts the general fund revenue summary. And then the report details a lot of the changes through the annexes, but also the risks to the budget foreseen at this stage. So some of the key risks will be inflation and also the fair funding review impact on future years. So those details are at paragraph 12 of this report. I don't propose to say too much more, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Yes, I think there are 1 or 2 questions coming.
Thank you very much. Can I just say, first of all, a thank you to the officer team and to portfolio holder for Annex 3 on page 43. I asked last year for a greater detail by service with columns to show the service, the various services, but adding up to the total for the budget, and then a breakdown of giving more detail service by service. I welcome that and would very much hope to see a greater development of that in future years. I found to be very helpful. Thank you very much. I've got a number of questions, but maybe I can ask 2 or 3 and then maybe pass to others for their comments before going through my list. Firstly, on inflation, You have before, you've given us some additional papers this evening, which gives us some indication of inflation. Just looking at that and then comparing that to page 43 or Annex 3, I'm a little mystified as to what the analysis is. The analysis on page 43 gives an inflation level of 905,000 and then indicates inflation increments and national insurance impact. On the analysis we've got here, I've got figures adding up with contracts 380 and utilities and staffing at 529. I still don't quite understand what the inflationary elements are. And I'd quite like to have seen a greater degree of detail on the contracts and the individual areas. I don't know, with the leisure centre, with the refuse contract and so on and so forth, a little more breakdown as to what those figures are so that we can understand and take a more balanced view as to what they are. And if I may just then add an additional point on car parks. Again, I was very interested to see a greater analysis of the car park revenues. We have that in the sheet tonight, which shows the totals, which I was particularly interested in. But we're still not clearly able to understand year by year just what's happened in terms of the COVID impact, the extra maintenance, the recovery from COVID, and the additional charges. All the figures are in the paper somewhere, but I'd just like to have seen them all brought together in more detail. I'm particularly interested, for instance, to see that the increase, the full year increase for next year for car parks is 730,000. That's the full impact of raising car park in dues and charges, as far as I can see. And that is something like a 14% increase over the sort of pre-COVID levels. It's quite a steep increase, and I don't think that that was particularly clearly drawn out when we were taking those decisions or ratifying those decisions earlier this year. My specific query on car parks relates to the figure for the recovery. As far as I can see, within the figures for next year, there's a £730,000 increase due to the car parking fees increases. There's a £265,000 recovery from COVID, which looks to be quite low in comparison to the following year of 820,000. It seems to me that that 265,000 should be a higher figure, therefore releasing more funds elsewhere. And then I also see 250,000 going in maintenance, and then I get a little bit lost after that. But as I understand it, next year the total will be 4.8 million, if I have understood the position correctly. But it just seems to me that there is more flexibility in the car parking area for more money to be coming through with some changed assumptions. And then if I may, Mr. Chairman, could I just clarify that as far as I can see, the bulk of the national insurance increase for next year is covered by the increased government grant, although I readily understand that government's doing its normal trick of taking it away for future years. And also, could I ask what the level of government grant has been this year, 1920, where are we, 21, 22, versus what was expected? Again, what's the total net increase in government grants to us, which we've been able to benefit or not from? We've obviously done quite well in that we've been able to take out £1 million of the COVID reserves or put it back where it belonged. But I'd just like to understand just where we are versus the government, and that may lead to another question for next year as well. If I may leave it there, and I'll come back later, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, could you clarify both where we are with car parking income at the moment? I mean, my understanding is that in the full year, our income was about 5.1 million, and it fell to something a little over half that in the first of the COVID years. Where's our estimate for where it's going to be this year? And then perhaps you could go on to deal with the extent of the government grant aid that we've had in both the past year and the current year.
So no problem. So for the car parks, our COVID recovery budget for next financial year is based on an increasing usage of 70% for the first 6 months and 75% for the second 6 months of the year. So we're currently tracking around this between the 70 and 75% is current performance. Obviously, we've taken a little bit hit with the Omicron variant over the last couple of months, but that is where we were tracking right before Christmas, before it took off, and we seem to be recovering back to that at this stage already. So we feel that that forecast for COVID recovery for car parks is careful but realistic, perhaps for next financial year. That is being impacted by the working from home, and we expect that that will slowly reduce over the next 2-3 years.
Sorry, could you clarify? You mean that the working from home impact will decrease, so car park usage will rise?
Yes, absolutely. So offices are currently working at part full, and those office workers will return back to car parks over the next few years. But also people are returning back to shops and the high street. So we're seeing the increase coming through, but at the moment we're tracking between 70 and 75% usage.
Sorry, now is that in income terms or volume terms or usage terms?
Usage terms, that is volumes of cars in the car parks, and to be honest, that tracks quite well to the value as well. So it's what they move alongside roughly the same speed.
So does that mean that certainly at the moment in the current year, actual income levels are probably within 10 or 15% of where they were in the pre-COVID era?
So no, so they are currently tracking at 75%. So we're 25% down on pre-COVID.
No, so that's why I was keen to know, are you talking about volume, numbers of cars parking, or the income from them? And I think you said it was volume.
Volume of cars.
But if we've put up the prices, which we did,
yes,
that surely will have an effect on our income, which should therefore be somewhat
yes,
nearer 100% than the pure volume figure of 70 to 75%.
I understand. Yes, yes. So we are tracking above. So that is shown separately in the MTFP, and we are seeing a above increase in this financial year in our monitoring as well, due to that car park fees and charges change. But we won't get back to a full 100% in 22-23. It will be in 23-24 that we'll get back to pre-COVID income levels.
Thank you. I mean, one thing which Councillor Martin's mentioned and I'll mention is I think for our big income items, it would be very useful to have not just deltas, but the actual absolute figures. It gives many people a far easier picture to have in their minds. Thank you. And on the government grant funding?
So if I could clarify, is that the COVID grant that you are interested in?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, it's just a figure. It's very difficult to tell. So much of the information which you give us is deltas and movements away from last year. Whereas I like to understand where we are in absolute terms this year versus last year, or where we're going to be this year for the outturn versus where we said we'd be a year ago. The portfolio holder made great cry of the fact that the government was being pernicious and nasty and not giving us enough money and so on and so forth. That may well be true, but I'd just like to see it demonstrated in the figures, and it's not. Thank you.
I think Mr. Clark would like to contribute.
So Chairman, if I can turn members to page 41, which is the budget summary, and at the foot of that note, Waverley's government support comes in three forms. One is retained business rates, and in our medium-term financial plan originally, we were expecting in 22-23 to have a reduced amount of retained business rates from the 1,850 in the current year. As Rosie explained in her introduction, the government have deferred again its review of the whole business rate funding and retention and fair funding review. And so they've confirmed at the same level our baseline level of retained business rate. So that's our core funding that we're forecasting will not change year on year. The services grant, Councillor Martin, you mentioned that it sort of broadly covers the additional NI impact. It does fall short. What you see in here as a cost of 146,000 is the general fund impact. The impact across the council is 170,000, for which we've received 138. And the 138 actually came with the description of covering a number of additional costs, including the impact of the NI. So it was never supposed to match pound for pound. In fact, it was supposed to exceed that amount, but it does fall short for Waverley. And then the bottom figure on page 41 is the new homes bonus, which isn't part of our core funding. New homes bonus is an amount that Waverley gets if, well, and other councils get if the net growth in new homes in the borough year on year exceeds a certain threshold. And again, this is something that the government said they would review in 22-23, but they've put that off by a year. We were expecting this to reduce significantly, but the increase you see from 977 to 1613 is for the purpose of our MTFP, is a one-off increase. We're not guaranteed any increase or indeed any new homes bonus funding in future years. And we are awaiting the review of the new homes bonus from the government that should come hopefully in this summer. But that increase is not part of our core funding. It's been helpful. It's I think we've described it as a sort of a stay of execution in the report, and it's enabled us to introduce some one-off additional items into the 22-23 budget. It doesn't give us any certainty beyond, but that is driven entirely from the sort of factual increase in the number of properties growth, the growth in the number of properties year on year in the borough. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could I just ask for further clarification? I
Do,
also
yes,
ask for
do.
what's been the benefit, or what during the course of this financial year that we're not yet quite through, how does the government funding compare now with what is expected compared with what we were saying or what you were saying just a year ago?
So Chairman, the 1,850 retained business rates, that is at what the government calls sort of safety net level. So we are expecting to receive 1,850. So that should come in as per budget. And the new homes bonus is guaranteed at that amount because that's pre-calculated and preset for the year. So our government funding across those two lines, which is all our government funding, will come in the current year as per our budget.
And sorry, Mr. Chairman, could I come back again? Therefore, how a year ago we were talking about taking 2 million out of the reserves to fund this coming year. We're only effectively putting 1 million in. So have we achieved that?
Okay, so Chairman, in the current year's budget, it was £1 million that we were drawing on as an additional COVID contingency. It was 2 million over the medium-term financial period, but in 21-22 it was 1 million. And that was in the event that, given all the uncertainty that we were faced this time last year in our income and expenditure due to COVID, in the event that our estimates didn't hold up and the actual impact that we experienced was more severe, we would draw on that £1 million. What this report says is that our monitoring in this year is showing that we are doing well against our budgets. Our assumptions are holding up, including, as we were referring to earlier, the car park assumptions and the extent to which we were hoping they would recover over the course of the year. And the other large area, of course, is the leisure centres, and we've worked very closely with Places Leisure, Kelvin and his team, to push them very hard to give us the benefit of the recovery that they're experiencing in the usage of the leisure centres coming through our management fee. So what we're saying is, if our projection now holds firm until the end of March, our outturn, we are hoping, will mean that we will not need to draw on the £1 million of contingency backed by reserves that we put into the budget for the current year, which is very good news, because that means that as per the council approval, that can return to its original purpose.
And Mr. Chairman, an answer on my inflation points. I still haven't seen a reconciliation between Annex 3, the inflation element there, and the sheet of paper that we were given tonight, and any understanding within the contracts as to which contracts are involved and how much? Thank you.
Well, what has been supplied, I see only to myself and the Vice Chairman, is information regarding the inflation assumptions. And if you care to make a note, for the year that's about to come, 22-23, contracts are expected to increase in cost by 380,000, utilities by 50, and staffing by 530, which totals 959,000. 23-24, inflation.
Mr. Chairman, I think we have got those figures in front of us. Yeah. But all I'm saying is it doesn't tally with the Annex 3 figures for inflation, and it still doesn't break down within the contracts, for instance, for 380,000 of which contracts and how much. It is the point that I was making earlier.
Chairman. So it actually reconciles to Annex 1. There's a line there that shows inflation 959, 862, 752. Actually agrees to those numbers you've got there. In terms of the breakdown of contractual, there are literally dozens of contracts sitting there attracting inflation to the minutiae. So it'd be useful if you could be more specific on which contracts we're interested in seeing inflation on.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I'd be interested in the big ones. I presume the refuse biffer and leisure centres and so on and so forth. There must be, as you say, many dozens of smaller ones, but there must be some significant ones, I would have thought.
Fine, okay. I'll sort something out there.
Sorry, will you provide more detailed information later?
Chairman, I'll circulate it
Thank you.
tomorrow.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could you put your microphone on?
I beg your pardon. If we go back to page 41, 2 COVID-19 government grants are shown there, the 457 and the 460. And I think you were asking, Councillor Martin, whether those compared to what we expected or whether they are greater or smaller.
Apologies, Chairman. Yes, you're right. I didn't pick those two up. Can I just ask Rosie to let the committee know how they are playing out in the current monitoring against those budgets, please? Thank you, Rosie.
So, Chairman, the first grant in page 41, which is the government grant towards costs, is a fixed amount. So we have received exactly as budgeted the 457 that is displayed there. The government grant towards income is the sales fees and charges compensation grant. So the government extended that scheme into the first 3 months of the 21-22 financial year. We haven't received the final payout for that, so we don't know exactly what will be due, but the claim submitted was slightly more than the £460,000. Whether they will award that full amount, we don't yet know. They will be doing their audit and reconciliation procedures before they pay that value over to us. So once we know, we will share that.
Thank you. Do you have a feel for when in the year that's liable to be confirmed?
I'm expecting it imminently, but they don't often provide much warning, unfortunately.
Thank you. Right. You care to read out Councillor Dixon's questions? Thank you.
The first question, shall I read them all out and then you'll answer them?
If they're fairly short.
Okay. Are there any costs associated with the ward boundary changes? That was the first question. And then, as we move to paperless, what is the budget for IT support, additional tech support for councillors? A review of digital platform as fit for purpose, i.e. paperless. What is our budget for cybersecurity? While the move to paperless is welcome, it would be foolish to think this comes without a cost if overall efficiency is to be maintained.
Thank you very much. So we have questions about the expected cost of the, or the known cost, I imagine, of the ward boundary changes, and what we expect the cost to be of moving to a paperless system with the appropriate IT support or increased IT support. And lastly, what we're basically spending on cyber security. In fact, how that's changed over the last 2 years would be of interest.
Chairman, shall I start? And then, sorry, let me deal with the easy one. Boundary review, page 34, 6th line down in the growth items. There's a one-off amount of £20,000 that our heads of service have estimated will be the change that we will be required to pay to our system providers for altering boundaries. So basically any system like our revenues benefits system that has parameters set in it that are geared around our current boundaries, we will need to ask those providers to change the boundaries, and that won't be a free service. So we're expecting, and things like our election service software provider, etc. On the cyber front, I'll let Rosie just tell you about what we've got in the budget. It might not be as easy as just putting a figure on it, because we actually employ an officer as well who's our cyber lead. But we have secured funding for our fight against cybercrime from the government just recently, and we also received some money in a few months ago as well towards that, because the government are heavily promoting and anti-cyber work by local authorities. It's in their interest too, so they offer funding, and Linda Frame is exceptionally good at applying for and securing funding as well. So Rosie, are there any sort of fixed costs in our capital programme for cyber?
Regarding fixed costs for cyber in the new financial year, I'm just back in my brains, there is nothing specific that I can think of for cyber security in the 22-23 financial year. Like Graham says, we had the 100,000 grant that is currently just recently been approved, and we have the officer in place. And then on the revenue side, we have a number of tools that we pay an annual fee. I couldn't tell you the figure off the top of my head, unfortunately, but we could share that following the meeting around some of the tools that the team use to ensure that cybersecurity of the council is kept at high priority.
Including the officer costs, it looks as though we're talking about a number somewhere between 0 and 100,000.
Yes, I would say, yeah.
Chairman, sorry, I've just remembered David Allen's on the call actually. I can't see his video, but I don't know if, so David runs our IT service. Did you want David to
I don't think we need to go
comment?
into huge detail now, if that's
fine.
the right ballpark. And the third question concerned the cost of moving to a paperless office in effect.
I can answer that one, Chairman, if you want. Although it's not my growth bid, I'm aware of it because the paperless project is one that I'll be working on with David. There's a capital bid of 30,000 in for the costs of moving to a fully paperless approach.
Right. Thank you. Councillor.
Just on that point, I wasn't going to raise it this evening, in fact, but as it has been mentioned, that's this move to paperless. May I just register my concern at that? I note that every member of the committee here tonight is using their paper copies. I could not have properly prepared this for this meeting without my paper copy, and I'm very reluctant to move away for significant items from paper, and I will be saying more about that at future meetings. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Now, I have a number of questions. Councillor Hegan sent in questions in the course of the day. She has, as we know, she can't be with us tonight. And the first concerns the Council Tax Hardship Fund, which is part of recommendation 3 of this item. And her question is whether, given the high take-up of the 500,000 COVID impact grant, usually we would put 5,000 aside, but of that 500,000, 345,000 was actually used. So the take-up was very much larger, understandably, than in previous years. She notes there's a £50,000 addition to the hardship fund for the coming year, but is that sufficient? And the other question she has is what happens to the unused 155,000 of the original COVID impact grant? Mr. Vickers.
Sure, Chairman. So the hardship monies that we got from government was just over £500,000, was part of the COVID scheme. So there wasn't a take up of it in respect of people asking for hardship. It was an automatic award of £150 to everybody on the council tax support scheme, which was a direct allocation. So effectively, it was just a broad brush on that one. The balance of that money has been kept back for what we call section 13A hardship, which is the £5,000 that we have in our budget. Now, historically, if you track back over budgets over the last 7 years since I've been here, we had probably about 30,000 in that budget to start with. And over the years, we just haven't had the demand through hardship. And it's not that we haven't been paying it out, it's just generally we haven't had, because the council tax support scheme has been in place since 2012, we haven't had a call from council taxpayers to access that hardship scheme. So we've been keeping a token 5,000 running in the budget, although we tend not to find any call at all on that through the year. So going into COVID, we've taken the view that there's a high chance that there may be a call on that going forward. And the money's been kept back on the balance sheet to fund any hardship applications that we have. And we've got a revenues team and a benefits team, housing benefit team, that actively look for cases that potentially would suit hardship. So it's not passive. We do try to look to help people.
Thank you. So the main message is that there's not an immediately alarming story behind the 345,000. That was simply a straightforward, if you like, grant or gift to all those who happened to be on the register at the time. I understand. And so your feeling is the 50,000 is an adequate provision given what we know at the moment.
Absolutely, Chairman. I think it's more than adequate from experience.
Okay, thank you very much.
Chairman, do you mind if I just add, so it's what we've said in paragraph 14.1 as well, that we're the 50,000 that is proposed to be topped up into that fund is actually also recognising the rising household bill cost that we're experiencing. It goes beyond the sort of longer COVID impact on people's household income, and we recognise the impact of inflation, the new national insurance levy, etc., on households. So I actually think there'll be a new demand coming through as on top of what we've just experienced.
Thank you. And then one other issue which affects recommendation 4, fees and charges. We wonder if we can get some clarity on what appear to be discrepancies or anomalies between two sets of planning charges. If one goes to the relevant page, which is pages 55 and 56 of the pack, you will see on page 55 a reference to householder fees. You've got £101, £211.20. And then on the other side, you've got a service level, bronze and silver, £110 and 247, again for the householder levels. And is there an issue here? Do these things need to be checked before they are promulgated or put to council, or is there an explanation?
Chairman, we absolutely will check them, and I think, you know, that thank you to Councillor Hegan. If there's a discrepancy in here, I mean, Rosie and Candice have been close to this, working with Kelvin and Zach. So I think if they've got any comments on what Councillor Hegan has raised, I mean, what I would say in general terms is that, you know, for some time we've been keen to revise the pre-app charges. These are the discretionary charges that Waverley makes for pre-app services that are optional, and planning applicants often find it very helpful to get pre-app advice, but they don't have to. But we set these charges, whereas the planning application fees generally are set by government and don't recover cost. So as we said in the report, you know, what we're aiming to do here is to have a better, more customer choice in our charging, that favours individuals over developers, and that looks to recover cost to a greater extent and gives a wider set of choices. So that's the thinking behind it. With regards to the specific points, I don't know if Rosie and Candice have had the chance to sort of digest Councillor Hegan's specific point, because this came in fairly late in the day. Rosie, have you had a chance to look at it?
I'm afraid I haven't had a chance to look at this, but the fees are not very comparable. They are difficult to compare, as the service has had a full revamp effectively. So they are offering different levels of service compared to what we used to have through the pre-application. But we will take a look to confirm and just make sure that those fees are correct.
Thank you. And the other area which might merit attention is the charges for green waste bins, where what's on the website appears not to match what's in the papers. We have a question from Councillor Peter Marriott. How sensitive are the MTFP projections to inflation rate assumptions?
Well, so in next year, we feel that we've been, which is the key year for the council to set next year's budget. We feel that our inflation provision is sufficient. It's set at a level that we think will carry through. Now, in terms of the sensitivity, well, each percent that rises, Rosie or Peter, you might need to just remind me, what does that actually add to our inflation bill on the general fund if inflation went up by 1%?
It's running about 140,000.
About 140,000. So, I mean, just coming back to the points earlier, Chairman, around what drives our inflation. Well, there's a pay award that's not resolved yet. And that's on quite a hefty cost base. There are CPI-based inflation uplifts that are pegged against our big contracts, and Peter's said he'll drop a note around on those to members. So, for example, our waste contract, which are one of our biggest general fund contracts, is pegged to March CPI, I believe. So we feel at the moment, on best information, we've put in sufficient in here. And as Peter just said, that's the impact of a 1% one way or the other. We feel that the budget is as robust as it can be in terms of inflation. Now, in future years, the assumptions are set out in the report, and the sensitivity again comes back to the amount that Peter said for the 1%. So we'll keep an eye on that, and we would hope that by this time next year, if inflation's settled down, then we will have sufficient in our medium-term financial plan. If it's running at the current levels, then clearly, as we go through the budget process, we're going to need to factor that in for both pay and contract cost.
Thank you. Just doing, I mean, our approximate cost base is over 30 million. So I'd have thought that if there was an average 1% increase affecting all of that, wouldn't we be talking about 300,000 as an annual sensitivity impact?
I'll just check with Peter, that's non-pay you were talking about.
Well, actually, if you look at it as a blended position, it's both really, because the pay is just, general fund is just shy of half of that. So about 14-ish. And the contractual side of it that attracts inflation probably runs at just shy of 15 million, really.
You are talking about around about it's 300,000 per percent of additional inflation, roughly. It's just good to have a general, if we've got total costs, be they direct salary costs or the indirect salary costs and other costs of the contractors. If you assume they're both equally vulnerable to inflation, then I mean, I think it's a fairly straightforward sum. It just shows what an important element it is of our cost planning.
It's very true, Chairman. But the thing is, not all the inflation goes up at the same rates. Different contracts are attracting different rates. And that's what I'm saying. It's a blended position. It's not a straightforward. And just to do a rule of thumb, straightforward division isn't going to give you that closer figure.
Thank you. Lastly, an issue that I certainly place great importance on is knowing how our general fund usable reserves are affected, and having had a chance to discuss it with Mr. Vickers, it looks as though, although the present situation, if you look at the accounts for 2021, so the 31st of March 2021 situation, you see an extraordinary increase in the general fund usable reserves from the previous 14 million to 27 million. But I think we're agreed that at least probably 12 million of that relates to government grants, which are of a temporary nature. And indeed, Mr. Clark put a note in the draft accounts that you couldn't treat those as additional spending power. Could you just elaborate a little on that and how quickly those will leave our general fund usable reserves?
Yeah, so Chairman, they were a temporary position. It was support from the government towards council tax due to COVID. Unfortunately, the accounting treatment that the government said we had to apply was to treat that as a usable reserve, and it isn't in the strictest terms. And that's why the Annex 6 is entitled General Fund Reserves within the scope of the medium-term financial plan, because these are the relevant reserves to the decision that the council will be taking, that the committee is scrutinising tonight. So this is what, in effect, the council on the general fund has held in terms of usable reserves. The item that you referred to isn't a usable reserve, and therefore we haven't included it on the table, because you wouldn't be able to dip into or use it as part of the solution for balancing the budget. So it will work its way out over the next couple of years as the very complicated funding around council tax works its way through the collection fund.
Thank you. And the last question on this again comes from Councillor Hegan and relates to the insurance reserves and the fact that she's something of an expert in this area, having worked in that industry, and contributed to the discussion about the change to using London Borough of Sutton as effectively our insurance broker and reinsurer for a certain part of our risk. Is that a matter which is under annual review, or are we tied into LBS for some number of years?
Chairman, we have contracted with them for 5 years, and it's under constant review with them. So Brian Gilmore's our insurance officer. He's been here many years dealing with insurance, so he's our interface there. We regularly look at the insurance position, so we're looking at the claims and the new claims coming in, and how claims are playing through their resolutions. We don't have a lot of claim in that respect. It's literally a handful, particularly there's less than, there must be 5 or 6 claims that have come through since we transferred to Sutton. None of them have great significance. The committee is very welcome to look at the position, as Councillor Hegan suggests. I'm not sure what you'd be looking at, to be fair, but you're welcome to set some terms and come and have a look.
One obvious aspect is value for money. Do we think that this will continue to be a money saving arrangement compared to the likely commercial alternatives?
So what was in the insurance report originally when we transferred last July, absolutely still stands. As far as the value for money is concerned, we've actually bought into, for a significantly less amount of money than we were paying Zurich, into a much wider expert team to handle our insurance and our insurance claims. So that alone is value for money. In terms of the premiums themselves, well, we have to go through the experience with Sutton in terms of our own claims experience. And at the moment, there's nothing coming out of the woodwork that would ramp up our insurance claims, touching wood. within the parameters set out in the insurance setup. And if we carry on as we are, we potentially would see at least a level pegging of the amount of money at the moment, unless the insurance market itself goes crazy with the rates of inflation at the moment, in which case we'd pick up something. But generally, I'm not expecting to see a significant increase in insurance as it stands.
Good, thank you very much indeed. Right, are there any?
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to speak, but I think Councillor Martin sort of opened the door and invited me to, with a reference to some comments I've made about grant funding. I think the table on by paragraph 8.4 of the report gives everybody a very graphic picture of where our grant funding has come from and where it's going to. You know, these numbers don't come from me. I'm only the messenger. I'm only repeating when I talk about these grants and our central government funding, what we are told by central government itself. These are our best estimates based on what we are told to expect. I take no pleasure in having to repeat it, but that's what it is. And just to clarify one other point, we are hopefully at the end of this year going to be able to repatriate £1 million of the £2 million COVID reserve that we put aside last year. That's got nothing to do with the government grant, one way or the other. It is because through our own wits, we avoided the £1 million of COVID contingency that we have put aside in the spending side, the net cost side of our budget. Thank you.
So just to clarify, what that will do is to be, well, repatriated to the various other reserves, earmarked reserves from which it came in the first place. Before we leave general fund, one thought to put to you is that car parking remains our biggest single income item. Obviously, it's taken a hit. But in this year, when there is some freedom to spend money on capital projects, it certainly seems to me that making the car parking experience as convenient as possible for users, and I'm thinking of things like ANPR, is something that we should give strong thought to, because the other aspect of car parking is that the practice in this place has been to leave it alone for a number of years and then have to put it up sharply. And that may have worked adequately in a low inflation rate environment, but it's not a very good one where you have, if we get continued inflationary increases of more than a comfortable level. And at that point, it becomes very important to have the technology, indeed, to be charging people by means of card or bank transfer, where increases can be made on, shall we say, a more granular level, a smaller level on a regular basis. If you've got any comments on that, I'd be very glad to hear them.
Yeah, very, very happy to. I think the issue at the moment in our car parks isn't to make them as friendly as possible, it's to make them as safe as possible. Because the condition that they've fallen into, because we haven't been able to afford to maintain them properly, has given us some serious health and safety issues. There are trip hazards, there are potholes. The general condition is appalling, which is why we're putting aside £250,000 just to bring them up to what we consider to be a safe standard. Technology is a difficult one. ANPR is another area where we are not allowed to do what our colleagues in the private sector are allowed to do, and that's use it to track drivers. We can only use ANPR to track cars, which is why when we have an ANPR car park, we have to put barriers in, because the ANPR is a system that refuses to open the barrier for a car, regardless of who's driving it. In principle, I agree with you 1,000%. I'm afraid that's not a decision we're allowed to take, but I'd be happy to co-sign any letter you'd like to write to Michael Gove to get it sorted.
It's one example. I'm sure it's not the only technique we can use, but I certainly do put into the discussion domain that making car parking as convenient as possible is something I think we've really got to pay even more attention to. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder if you might allow me to come back with a couple more questions before we move on to the next item of business. Could I ask, please, about the climate change and whether the administration feels that this MTFP is consistent with the climate change emergency declared by the council, and whether we're on track for carbon neutrality by the year stated. I'm not including, for the purpose of this question, the housing side of things, and I'll ask another question about that when we come to the housing revenue account. I do note that on page 24, it is highlighted as one of the risks that we are facing in paragraph 12.1, the significant non-earmarked reserves. We don't have any earmarked reserves for our limited ability to fund change in the corporate plan, the zero carbon and structural deficit, and to face any impacts like planning appeals and judicial reviews. But I'm particularly interested in the view as to whether we are consistent with the objectives in the climate change emergency. My second question concerns the planning department. Thank you for the detail on page 49, which you've given, in fact, for each of the service areas. But it's just a question of the planning side and planning and economic development. We've for many years struggled with our planning department, and we continue, it seems, to struggle with the planning department. I'm not sure whether, just looking at these numbers, whether I can be convinced that all will be healthy and rosy in a year's time. I note that we've got some pretty small increases in non-statutory fees. I realise it's difficult to put them up, but it's £20,000. There are some efficiency savings of 50,000, which are identified. Are those realistic in terms of where we are with the planning department? We have in the analysis here planning income realignment of 250,000, but then that seems to be offset by a COVID income recovery of 250,000. Most importantly, there's an item called movement in recharges of 171,000. I'm just concerned as to whether we have got planning really properly mapped out here and whether we are on course to succeed during the course of the next year. Thank you.
Good. Mr. Clark, you were keen to come in here.
Chairman, so one of those questions was to the administration, so I'll obviously let the leader answer that one, but if I can pick up a couple of those points. And in fact, Chairman, can I pick up a point that Councillor Martin made earlier that I forgot to answer, which was, I think, Councillor Martin, you referred to the additional income from the increase in fees and charges running along the line in the MTFP, starting with 730,000. I think you referred back to the report when council approved that, and that was in September 21. And we had referred in that report to a figure around the 1.1, 1.2 million mark as being the potential full year additional income coming from this. So I just wanted to reassure you that was referred to when members took that decision as being the potential for additional income from those tariff changes. I won't say increases because some of them didn't increase. It was a restructure, and because it was a restructure aimed at influencing driving habits of our parkers. Yeah, there is some risk to those numbers because they were based on a whole bunch of assumptions, but we referred to them in the report. We're comfortable putting those figures in here, but we need to track those, and Annie and her team monitor on a weekly basis how we're doing on the car park. On the planning generally, I just sort of signpost you to an all-member briefing next Tuesday. Just it's an update on how we're getting on with the planning improvement programme. And I think a lot of the answers, Councillor Martin, and the reassurances will come through there. We heard this morning from Zach and Sally that we've cleared the backlog of validations now completely. And when I think the oldest application that's awaiting validation is just over a week old now. So we're making progress. We're not there yet. We've still got, like most councils that run planning departments, we've got resource struggles. And coming back to your point about income, the 20,000 and the 20,000 appearing in next year and the year after arises from a predicted take-up in pre-app following the introduction of our new tiered structure charging program and our better service. So that's where that comes from. The 250 actually is our core income from planning fees is down on our estimate. So we're making an adjustment to put it at a realistic and achievable level. And one of the reasons for that is that whilst volumes of applications are up, they're at the householder application level, which are the applications where we make proportionately the biggest loss compared to the cost that goes into those applications. So that's why we're having to make an adjustment there in the base planning income. There are fewer large schemes coming through than there were a couple of years ago, and many more householder applications. I think I've picked up on all of the points. I'll leave the leader to pick up on the climate change point, leader.
Sorry,
Just
Mr.
before
Chairman,
we do
just the 171,000 movement in recharges, what is that?
Not sure. I need to look at Rosie on that one. Thank you, Chairman.
So you will also see on that page there is a movement in some staffing from. So there was a movement of the tree team from the planning department through to the commercial services team. So there's an adjustment there for the recharge of tree time spent by those officers who are working across services. So there is an adjustment there.
Sorry, that's, if you like, a movement in favour of reducing planning's costs, totaling, I think, 166,000 roughly. This is the movement in recharges, which is the other way, an increase in cost, 171,000. So if you could look at that.
Yes.
And then I've got a further question as to where the planning income pressure benefit the planning department is being funded from.
So the movement in recharges is the movement of the team. So you'll see in the top line of page 49, there's the tree officer posts move from planning policy, and that is moved into the commercial services team. So those officers are still doing the same work. They're still supporting both planning and commercial. So there's a saving on the planning side through the tree officer posts moving from planning policy. And then the recharges is partially reflecting the charge of their service and other items that are also included in that movement in recharges there. So there is an adjustment on both the direct costs and the recharge.
Rosie, is it fair to say that when you move staff around, it shouldn't have very much impact on the net cost of the services?
Overall,
affected?
yes, agreed. So overall on general fund, you'll see very little impact on recharges, but between services, you can see the movement there.
Thank you. And can you comment on the planning income pressure, 250,000, which is basically a credit, if you like. It reduces the apparent cost of planning. Where is that coming from?
So that planning income pressure was the reversal of the COVID income. So we'd reduced the budget for planning income in 21-22 due to the COVID impact. And what we're doing there is reversing the COVID impact in 22-23 back to original levels. And then the 250,000 planning income realignment is the growth to take us back to a realistic level. And that is due to the change in volumes from developers through to householders, which are less profitable for the council, unfortunately.
So what's happened really is that we had, if you like, a general volume decline because of COVID in the previous year. And although that particular pressure has disappeared, it's been replaced by what happens to be, coincidentally, the same effect, because the mix between large applications and householder applications has moved towards householder ones, which earn less money.
Yes, correct.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank
Talk
you,
about
Chair.
climate change.
Climate change, I will just say every year we talk about ANPR and we talk about planning fees. It'd be fantastic if the government decided to get rid of those ridiculous prohibitions on us at least covering our costs.
If you could stick to the point,
Yes,
please.
of course. Climate change. I'll try and channel Councillor Williams slightly. Obviously, our main climate change issues are the berries, leisure centres and housing. Now, housing, I'm sure you'll cover as part of the HRA, and I'll refer members also to the email I sent around last night, which covers a number of those issues. But in terms of climate change, obviously the berries project is one of the self-contained elements that addresses a number of the climate change elements, and leisure centres is another. The Cranley Leisure Centre project being one of the main self-contained units that we're looking at dealing with on the general fund side. We've had a great deal of success with grants in this domain. I believe it's in the order of £900,000 of grants that have been brought in the climate change realm, and certainly if we've got a full-time grants officer, which has been proposed in the budget in general, we expect to see some expansion there. I think, though, really just to conclude, we've never at any point said, in fact, we've explicitly not said that this is something that the council can do all by itself. And at all points, we're expecting the government to contribute properly, but also to actually fund elements of which it's actually highlighted itself that it intends to do. The main one of those I'll get to, I'm sure, when we get to housing. But we've never said ever that this is entirely funded by the council. So the areas that we can impact on, which the Climate Change Action Plan dealt with last night, I believe are fully contained and funded within the budget going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes. Just comment that, of course, when we say government, let's never forget ultimately it's just other taxpayers. Councillor Martin.
Thank you. May I thank the leader for the clarification. Can I just ask where we would see the 900,000 that he refers to coming through the accounts? Well, I mean, obviously it's not all in 1 year, it's spread over many years, but where would I see those numbers coming in? And do they come in as income offset by expense?
I think it's in the HRA account.
The 900.
I thought he was referring to non-HRA.
Yeah, the 900 that the leader referred to is general fund. It's not in the pack that you see here because it doesn't form part of the budget for approval. I think on reflection, hearing the discussion, it would be helpful if we presented in a sort of a little memorandum to the budget what's going on in terms of our grants that are coming in, particularly around climate change and other areas. And we can do that through our quarterly reporting to ONS. That might be the best way to do that.
I would certainly think a number of that materiality should have been drawn to our attention. So I'm grateful for the leader for informing us, because there is a very similar number in the HRA to fund the 7 house pilot. Now, is that being funded? I thought that was being funded by a government grant. So is that a separate form of income?
No, I'd like to leave Peter to pick that up.
Yeah, so just on your first comment, and one of the things the exec discussed today is about having a table of all of any grant income we've got from other sources so that everybody's clear what it is and how it is distributed. I believe with the HRA side, now we'll have to clarify when we get to that point, I believe that was actually just a redistribution of other money. It's a voids budget, isn't it? I think that's being repurposed for the use of that. Hugh is on the line though, I think, and probably primed to answer.
Yes,
yes, Chair. I mean, basically, this is the rents income will pay for the 7 properties that you mentioned.
Thank you. I think someone told me something that wasn't quite accurate, as I suddenly assumed that the government had given us £1 million more or less to get on with trialling. Okay, thank you very much. We've had over an hour on this, which is not an entire surprise given the volume of detail in it. Do any other members of the committee wish to make a contribution at this stage? And seeing no forest of hands, I therefore propose that we go back to the recommendation, and we are happy with these recommendations with the important caveat as far as recommendation 4 is concerned, that the fees and charges are thoroughly checked before it goes to council or indeed to the executive. So on that basis, are we agree?
Thank you. Could we just add in a point about this £900,000 or its equivalent, a greater, that we would like to see further analysis of that. I'm surprised that it's not within the overall general fund accounts that we've got before us. But I would like to see in the future some separate analysis of that as a recommendation.
Well, it's, I mean, certainly if we are showing other, I mean, this is a grant that would presumably form part of our revenue accounts in due course. So I think just as a general comment, one would expect all these things to be somewhere and to have our attention drawn to them. It doesn't sound terribly different, really,
Chairman,
from the special help for the business rate relief.
So, Chairman, I think what we need to do is we can expand Annex. Where's our capital? Annex 5. So Annex 5 will be going through to, which is projects and capital schemes. What's not on here are the projects and capital schemes that have been approved and funding from external resources such as the ones we just talked about. So I think an extension to this table might actually pick up the committee's concern about the lack of visibility on those, even though there's not a specific decision around those. It's sort of for information and context.
Thank you. That would be fine if we could have that.
Good. Thank you very much indeed. Well, are we happy to signify our, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to check if you wanted any resolutions on basically investor save in the car parks or the insurance agreements with Sutton.
I think at this stage we should be happy to make the point, the substantive point about fees, making sure they're accurate. Certainly, I would propose that we encourage the executive to think very, very hard about car parking as our major source of income in any way in which we can make it easier, if we need to make more frequent but much smaller increases. And I think on the insurance side, that's something we should just look at in due course. But this committee content with what I've outlined.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, yes, I think we're not being asked to agree the recommendations. I think we're being asked to make comments on them.
That is what
of the process. We've made some comments. We haven't got any fundamental deep objections, but we're looking for further clarification. And there are some observations that we've made which can perhaps be helpful. Thank you.
Right, but are you content with what I outlined a couple of minutes ago? Is that agreed? Thank you. Right, we'll now move on to the next item, which is the housing revenue account, which, as we all know, is a new addition to our remit. As if we didn't have enough, but it's certainly a very interesting area. So, Peter, are you going to do that, or is it going to be handed over to Rosie or you?
I'll cover it. I can see Hugh's posed.
I could introduce it if you wish.
Please do. Yes.
So thank you very much, Jen, and I apologise that I can't be in the chamber. I just want to start with some general comments and some comments on the individual recommendations, and then Peter may want to come in with some of the detail. What I want to say is this is an exciting but challenging budget in terms of service delivery. We're looking to resolve the challenges that the housing service is now facing, but it's also a budget that looks to the long term. As the report mentions, we've got a housing revenue account 30-year business plan, and we are in a self-financing, and we are in a period now where we're paying the interest and the principal, and that's one of the challenges that the plan is facing currently. We've had the moderate shocks that the business plan attempted to mitigate. I know it's a few years ago now, but we had the 4 years of rent reduction. And that wasn't just a rent reduction. The plan was also assuming that we were going to have a rent rise above inflation. So that was a real body blow to the business plan. But then we've had the COVID, and we've had the obvious things about lost income. But it's also made us lose our momentum on improving our services and actually increasing our income. We continue to have contractual issues, which again, there's the obvious costs and the obvious challenges that faces, but there's also the hidden costs that members of staff's focus is away from improving services and and bringing efficiencies and just focusing on dealing with these contract issues. We have inflation, which you talked about under the general fund. We've got the decarbonisation agenda. And to put that into some perspective, we've got 800 properties that were built before 1945, and they're going to be a real challenge to bring up to the level that the council wishes it to be. And then the other challenge is the building standards and new building standards, especially around health and safety. And again, this year our budgets were hit with large expenditure in making our senior living schemes safe, and we feel that that's going to continue for the next couple of years. So I really ask members to scrutinise the recommendations in this report, taking into account the issues that I've raised. The report recognises, because of the changing environment, that we need to do a strategic review going forward and present that to members. Just on the rent rise, the report puts forward the argument that our tenants have managed last year's rent rise, if we measure that by the rent collection performance. But we also recognise that some individuals can fall between two stools and will suffer real hardship. So we are introducing a hardship fund to help those people. The rent increase needs to be seen in context of the 30-year plan, because the members need to consider the cumulative effect the rent rise has on future rent streams. So the 4.1% will give us an increase to deliver services now, and it equates to £1.61 per week average across all our tenancies. I have consulted the Landlord Services Advisory Board and the Tenants Panel on the rent rise. They truly understand the need for the rent rise, but they want to ensure that the additional money is invested in our homes and the building of new homes, and that we deliver value for money. And that's something myself and Andrew and Peter's team need to ensure that happens. So this budget and the recommendations are to meet the challenges that we're facing now and the challenges in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, we have with us Councillor Seaborn, who's asked to speak on this matter. As a former chairman of the Housing Overview and Scrutiny Committee, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. The points I want to make actually relate to the capital budget, so I wonder whether you might want to have some discussion on the immediate operations budget first. I'm happy to toss my points in, but I think there's they
in
come
many
later.
ways, it's capital, which is probably the biggest issue. So if you care to make your points now, I'm sure that will be useful.
Okay, thank you. Right, well, I'm going to start. It's bad form to point out mistakes, I realise, but I did actually send an email to Graham at the beginning of last week and haven't had an acknowledgement. So it's probably sunk somewhere in a very heavily populated in tray. I'm not sure. But on Annex 3, the bottom lines for the last 3 years, the budgets the last 3 years are each, in my estimation, out by $250,000. So the bottom line is not the sum of the line items immediately above. So you might care to look at that, and I apologise if I got it wrong, but the numbers were crunched in Excel and I did check them. So I think there is an error there, an omission of $250,000 somewhere.
Sorry, to be accurate, are we talking about the 22-23 column ending in?
No, it's 23-24, 24-25, 25-26 in Annex 3. So the bottom lines there are each $250,000 shy of the total of the lines above. As far as I can see, that might be the emissions of disabled adaptions, because that's the number that would explain the missing item. And at the bottom of that same Annex 3, it says staffing 13% of the programme value. I don't think in any of the cases, except in this year's the 2021-22 budget, is the number actually 13%. It varies by quite a bit from 13%. So I would suggest maybe it would be appropriate just to take the 13% of programme value out, because the number isn't 13%. So that's Annex 3. And then in Annex 4, I think, again, some numbers have got juggled in the funding of the new build programme in the middle of Annex 4. So that the total number is right, the 31.9 million in the right-hand column, but the two numbers above are out by a couple of million. So capital receipts is short by the amount of the total spend up to and including 2021. And that number seems to have gone into the line below. None of this actually is likely to have any bearing on the discussion this evening. It's not critical, but it's quite large numbers that do appear to be in error. So could I just suggest that you check those, and then assuming I've got it right, any papers that come to council for approval have those numbers adjusted. So sorry about that. In terms of matters of substance, I've got a couple of points I'd like to bring up relating to the capital spend. I actually find it a little disappointing that we didn't have the forecast outturns for 21 and 22. Sorry, that we're shown the outturns, but not the original budget figures, because that would enable members to make a judgment on the council's recent performance and ability to deliver a capital programme. And I bring that up because the 2021-22 anticipated outturn for the HRA development capital programme is 2.4 million. The budget approved in February 21 was for 18.3 million. So we've got a massive underspend, and one can understand that COVID has had quite an influence on that, but has it, is that all of the story? There have been planning issues. I don't know whether there's staffing issues. The point I'm trying to make is, have these factors been understood? Because we've got quite an aggressive budget for the next 3 years, or next 4 years, and something's caused us to fall well short this year. Have we understood those factors, and are those factors mitigated so that the budgets are actually reasonable for next year? Okay, that was the first point I wanted to make. Second point is that we have a programme of purchasing new builds from developers using things like commuted sums, which is excellent. We've allocated 6.7 million over the next 3 years for this purpose, which I guess is going to yield maybe something like 20 houses. Excellent. What I would like to know is, has provision been made for decarbonising these properties? Because for the most part, they'll be built to a standard lower than the ones that Waverley builds itself. And although building regulations are tightening now, it won't be till 2025 that building regulations are such that the developers are going to be providing us with properties that are where we want them. So again, can I ask, have we just addressed that? And is there anything in the budget numbers that makes provision for decarbonising properties that are going to come to us with gas central heating probably, and maybe not the same standards of insulation that we would want? So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Hugh, would you like to comment on any of those?
I think that they are Mr. Vickers and Mr. Smith to answer those particular questions.
Chairman, I'll pick that up.
Okay.
So the matter of so first of all, I'll cast the schedules and check on those numbers. So thanks for pointing those out, Councillor Seaborn. So the matter of the budget in terms of 21-22 not showing on the schedule, I deliberately put forecast into the schedule because that's the most relevant number when it comes to looking into the medium term as to what's going on. The budget, performance against budget this year is in the performance report, the quarterly performance report. So all the detail of that performance is still available. But it's not hugely relevant to what we're looking at in context of the business plan. It's a good question about, is that performance going to carry on? A lot of, so there were two key things going on with the underspend, particularly in the new build area, is that, first of all, Annex 4, so Annex 4 now is a complete restatement of the schedule that you'd have seen last year and in previous years. So you've got a whole life picture of the schemes in progress at the moment. over the next 4 years. And that's showing through with the commitment of the £32 million. If you look at last year's budget, you only had 1 year of the new built programme. And there was money put in that with the assumption that they needed to show that amount of money to indicate not just what they would be spending in year, but what they may need to carry forward on schemes, which wasn't really useful when you want to know the whole picture, which is now what you've got on Annex 4. Also, so that's a big part of the underspend situation in the current year. But also COVID has an impact in terms of capacity to deliver out on not just the new build, but the core programme and responsive repairs. And we've seen that come through on the void work that's gone on rather than actual responsive repairs, because we've got access to void properties where we haven't had access to people's properties during lockdowns. And so there's been a bit of a switch around going on. So in terms of budget for 21-22, it wasn't really relevant to Annex 3 and Annex 4. What's relevant is what we think we're spending this particular year and what we think the total commitment actually is going forward. So that's the reason why it's sitting there in the way it is. Going on to the decarbonisation strategy on the Section 106 acquisitions, well, the specification when we're procuring such properties takes that into account. We've declared a carbon emergency, and the specification sits, and I see Andrew's on screen there and nodding away. So Andrew may wish to put a bit more in on that particular aspect around the specifications. Andrew,
please comment.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Peter. Yes, thank you, Peter, also for outlining what Annex 4 is showing us now in terms of spend on schemes. And there is a story behind each of those schemes, which I could probably tell the committee why things have been delayed in the way they have. And that certainly isn't through lack of effort from the team, but all the things that Peter has mentioned are indeed germane. Yes, when we're speaking to developers about schemes that we wish to work with them, we are very selective. We're selective strategically where we want to acquire properties, and also the specification that we will put to the developer and say, this is what we expect. And so the three that are particularly live at the moment, working with 3 different developers, smaller developers, and they know what we want. So I'm hoping, Councillor Seaborn, we won't need to retrofit, but actually we will get what we want, which will meet the design standards that were adopted by this council last July. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Can you comment, will those houses be bought at least EPC-C or even higher? What are you hoping for?
I would have to consult Louisa Blundell on the detail of that, Chairman. She's a detail guru.
Well, if it wouldn't be too much trouble, could you actually chat it through with her? Because it's something.
Yes, of course, Chairman. Yes.
And it'd be interesting to see what we're, in our immediate attempts, both to buy properties and also to build them ourselves, what EPC standard we are aiming for.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that. Extremely useful. Do I take it also, perhaps, Peter, you can comment on this, that the other aspect is that there was a slightly different approach to forecasting likely spend, and now you're being quite rigorous about it. And what we see here is, absent one very important point, a realistic build-out timetable. Is that fair comment?
In the round, yes, that's fairly accurate. There's 2 aspects to this. We know that there's inflationary pressure coming through these build costs for the schemes currently in progress, which we need to evaluate, and that needs to be feeding into our strategic review, because we need to understand that £32 million in terms of our recent experience of tender returns on some of these contracts. So that's really what's playing through as a key risk around Annex 4 at the moment.
Thank you. I'll come back to you, but Councillor Adams.
It's just a quick thing on the EPC again. Are we in a position where we have to, if somebody leaves one of our houses, and so it's going to be relet.
Could Councillor Adams raise his microphone?
Sorry, I thought, yeah. Which is the one? Can you hear me now? Yeah. Yes, if somebody leaves one of our houses and has to be relet, in the private sector now, you have to be up to EPC C to let it. Is that the case with our properties as well?
I can answer that, Chair. You can.
Please do.
Yeah, so basically, no, we are letting homes at D. There are very few. The majority of our homes are already at C. We're working to move into B. And I basically, in terms of purchasing new homes, we would at least assume a B at a B, if not going towards an A. But no, we are, I'm afraid, still letting homes that are at a D.
Thank you. If I can just go back to the inflation point, because I think you don't have to read much of this report to realise just how significant this is. And it obviously affects the Section 106 purchases. You end up, I suppose, getting fewer units for the same amount of money, because each unit will cost more. But in terms of the schemes in progress, that's where, to me, there seems to be the greatest risk. And there you've got build out times extending out to 24, 25. And do we have an established strategy as to how we would react to severe increases in building costs? I mean, the nightmare scenario that I can picture is where we have schemes that we don't finish. Now, are we simply going to complete the schemes come what may? It sounds, if you like, socially wise, but financially stressful. Or do we have another approach in mind? Or is this something we're going to be working out in the course of this year through the strategy review?
So it's a really great question to pose, and the answer is the last bit. We will need to be working that out. So to get to the answer as to where we need to be with each of these schemes, we've engaged our asset advisors, Montague Evans, to do a review of the schemes in progress, to understand the commitment as it sits there and the potential liabilities within continuing to build out on those schemes, but also to understand what our options are and what our strategy should be on each one of those, so that we can make some informed decisions, or the council can make some informed decisions on how best to complete those schemes, even if it just means a longer time frame, and understand what the options are, and also not just the options, but the risks sitting with those options, because delaying has its risks as well. And also bearing in mind there are tenants that have been decanted on these properties. It's a bit of an equation to solve ultimately, because we have to house people in suitable properties. So that review we've already started. It's underway. We've commissioned to start that process.
Good. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Smith, you were keen to contribute.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just to say that I have already consulted with Mrs. Blundell on the marvels of WhatsApp, and in all our discussions we're aiming for EPC A, which we hope to achieve. Just picking up Mr. Vickers' comment about the strategic review, we are facing very much increasing pressures in our new build in terms of increasing costs, as you rightly pointed out, but also, as our new housing strategy points out, as it'll come through the committee process, the need to set rents at the levels that our low-income working households can afford. So we've got some work to do in the coming year, Mr. Chairman, to try to balance all this, to get the highest possible standards, the highest green credentials, zero carbon, homes that our people can afford. So yeah, there'll be some sleepless nights trying to work this out.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Sorry, Councillor Martin, who else?
We'll let Annie go first.
Annie, after you.
Thank you, Chairman. I think it's always worth remembering as well with the schemes that we're going through various gateways, from the planning process through to the tenders coming back, through to the negotiation of any additionals that we want. And at each of those gateways, we can do a risk assessment, we can look at the value for the money and make a decision dynamically on the scheme as we're going through as to whether we should proceed, because there are always options. There are always options to pause. There are always options to stop. But thinking of the objectives of getting more homes for our residents, bearing that in mind, and whether it's on our own land or whether it's land we've bought. So there are lots of gateways and lots of options where we can think about what we're doing. But the strategic review we're about to undertake is the really critical one as to how we balance the new purchases versus the builds versus any other delivery method that we've got with an affordable programme, because clearly the money is not going to be everywhere.
Thank you. I think by gateways, I'd call them go, no-go points. But the trouble is, once you've started, you've actually got the first turf turned and the first bricks in the ground. That's when it becomes very much trickier. And I think that's where the major focus has to be.
It does. I think it's a very tricky market out there at the moment with supply problems, labour problems, and rising costs. It is a tricky market to be building in.
Thank you. Councillor Martin, you had your hand up.
Thank you. I'm very new to the housing revenue difficulties. I've not taken any interest in the past in it, but it is an extraordinarily fascinating subject, and it's a very good read, I have to say. What I'm concerned about is going back to our climate emergency and where we are and the degree of consistency of this plan versus what we want to achieve. What is the objective? Do we want to get to standard A for all of our houses by 2030? I guess that if we want to do that, we've got to be converting 2 houses a day between now and the end of 2030 in order to do that, starting today, which sounds quite a tough proposition. I'm hearing that we haven't got any money. We're relying on the government to give us money. I wonder if we're in a bit of a catch-22 though, because if the government were suddenly to make all the money available to all of the authorities all over the country, presumably there'll be a huge scarcity of labour, people who are able to do this job, and they simply couldn't do it, or we wouldn't get any new houses during the time when they were doing that conversion level. So just where are we in regard to this climate emergency and the need to get the housing stock to the relevant standards that we all aspire to? Thank you.
See, the Councillor Follows is keen to contribute.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's an interesting point, actually, because the government's own targets for EPC C are 2030 and EPC A for 2050. So that crunch that you've spoken about there, I actually agree that there is going to be a bit of that, isn't there, before 2030, even to get it to that point. I think from our perspective, we would like to be more ambitious with that and have a general ambition to get to EPC A for the majority or a decent proportion of our stock before we get to 2030 or around 2030. But obviously there are difficulties with that in terms of supply and funding and various other things. In the email I circulated last night, I started referring to the asset strategy that Peter David is drafting, because one of the things I think it's important for certainly us here and certainly for the administration to know is what actually that amount is going to cost to get us to the point of being able to deliver that. Because at the moment it's all well and good saying, oh, we'd like to be somewhere by 2030 or this by 2050, but actually we need to know what that is. Because as we've proven with other parts of the climate emergency, there is sometimes funding out there if we seek it and if we know what we're actually after and what we need. So I've been certainly keen in my brief tenure as a temporary housing portfolio holder before Christmas to ensure that is very clear in the asset strategy. So we're not going to shy away from what that's going to cost. And I'll save that for when you see the asset strategy. So from my point of view, the government is going to have to do something to meet its own policy by 2030 because it's stated EPCC. So you can discount a bit at the front of work we would be doing anyway to maintain our properties. So there's a chunk at the beginning of the investment required that is repair money, voids money, and other things that we would have done anyway, which would be doing things like insulation and maybe ground source heat pumps, that kind of activity. But to get the rest of the way, we're going to need to know what government plan to do. And at that point, we can then look at what extra we need to do to achieve where we are. So I completely agree. A lot of these are unanswered questions, but equally government's own policy on this is an unanswered question and has absolutely the capacity to cause the crunch that you've just described, Councillor Martin. So we await what the government's going to do about that.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's quite separate point. You can have all the money in the world, but you haven't got the bodies to actually do the work required, it won't happen.
I can actually, and if you indulge me, Chair, I completely agree with you there. And one of the things that I've reflected on over the past couple of months is I've probably said ground or air source heat pumps about 50 times without having ever seen one or particularly understanding the technology or indeed any of the alternatives, which is one of the reasons why we've asked for a brief originally for the exec, but I'm pretty keen to expand it to all councillors so that we can all start to get our heads around the scale of the task, because it's clearly massive.
May I say how refreshing it is to hear this tidal wave of realism sweeping across it. Councillor Merriweather.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, in a similar vein, you know, I'd just like to remind ourselves that you know, we're not always looking for government handouts, and we're not always looking for higher taxes. I think I'd be happy if the government let us keep a fraction of the £35 million in business rates.
I do appreciate your regular gospel or sermon, but given the size of the agenda, if you'll forgive me, can we leave it there? I think, no, we're just getting back to this. We've looked at the capital side. The revenue side, again, I don't pretend to be any more of an expert than Councillor Martin. It's very much new ground for me too. Does anyone wish to comment on the income side, which looks at the moment pretty healthy? Certainly those of us used to worrying about the general fund regard the certainty of rental income with a certain amount of envy. But obviously one of the big calls on that particular income stream is capital repayment as well as interest. And that is going to get bigger quite fast. Perhaps it gets bigger enough to notice in the course of this MTFP, and obviously will get bigger even faster for a time after that. But I am well aware we've already had an hour and 40 minutes, fascinating though it's been. Does anyone on the committee wish to ask or raise any points about that? Sorry. And while you're thinking about that, Hugh, would you like to comment?
No, I think I wanted to comment on the capital, but I think it was covered my points. Thank you very much.
Okay, members. Councillor Martin.
Mr. Chairman, I mean, the only thing, I mean, the rise in rent is quite steep, but it's within the inflation that we're looking at, and of course the capacity of our tenants to pay that, given all the other pressures on income, is going to be an area of concern. It's clearly a risk, but apart from that, I'm very happy with the income side that I can see here. Thank you.
Thank you. Has anyone got any further thoughts on this? Or shall we simply note the recommendations? And I would just add at this point, as I mentioned at the start, I wish to set up a working group of the two of the scrutiny committees. The other chairman, Councillor Dinas, is enthusiastic about it. So we'll be writing to all members seeking people who wish to serve on it. I think the important thing is you'll need to be enthusiastic and prepared to work quite hard. Anyway, if that is enough on housing revenue, can we move on to the third of the major financial items, which is the capital strategy? Mr. Vickers, I imagine.
It is indeed, Chairman. Okay, so capital strategy, I'll just do a quick trot through what's there and what's changed so we can get the context of it. So just in terms of a bundle of papers, it's a suite of documents, and it consists of the treasury management strategy, which is dealing with our banking, our money market investments, our borrowing policy, and very importantly, our MRP policy. It's also what governs our treasury management activity. So the treasury management strategy is a really important document in that respect. And within that, there are the treasury management indicators within which we work to. It gives the boundaries of what we can do in treasury management. Then there's a capital strategy, which is an overarching governance document that sets out how we govern our capital spend in its entirety, and how governance is dealt with in a capital context. So it's capital expenditure and investment. And then there's the asset investment strategy, which was formerly the property investment strategy, but that no longer exists as of full council's resolution coming in February. So the asset investment strategy is a much more detailed governance document in respect of how we deal with asset investment. It's a much more in-depth level of what needs to go on there and what we can and can't do in respect of investment in assets. I mean land and buildings in that context. There's an infographic on page 125 which demonstrates that relationship quite nicely in pictures to show what I've just described. So the overarching context here is that about 18 months ago, the government started a full-scale review based on its concerns around local authorities' foray into asset investment. The National Audit Office took a great interest in this, and they had a good look around particular authorities not that far away from us to see what was going on. And then they went into a period of consultation on the Treasury Management Treasury Management Code, which is a SIPFA code, and the Capital Code, or effectively the Prudential Code for capital. So that 18 months concluded in the revision of both of those codes in late December, just prior to Christmas. If you recall, a year ago, February, we just rolled forward our existing capital and property investment strategies, and the treasury management strategy with just updated indicators, pending the outcome of this quite long-term review that's been going on. So the three documents you've got in front of you now, they literally are brand new documents for intents and purposes. There's some very different messages in those documents to what we were previously working to. And they conform very closely to the changes that came through from Public Works Loans Board access, HM Treasury's requirements around what we can and can't do if we wish to access borrowing going forward from government sources. And they conform very closely to SIPFA's, both the SIPFA's codes and also what's expected in terms of governance in our financial management code. So there's a lot more governance in these documents. Alongside the experience we've had in the last couple of years, that's been useful as we matured into the whole investment regime, which has been fairly new in the last 5 or 7 years or so, certainly within Waverley. Getting into those particular areas and bringing it into our MTFP and other strategies. So that's kind of what these documents are. Just a little bit more detail on what's physically changed. Effectively, we cannot do anything for yield, primarily for yield anymore. That just doesn't exist. If we chose to do that, we're on our own and the government will cut us loose. And the only way we'd ever borrow is if we want to refinance a current position, excluding anything we choose to invest in going forward. So it would make it very awkward for us if we chose to carry on down that route.
Could I just chip in? Could you,
Sure.
Am I right from what I've read that if we actually have to tell them what we're doing, and if we chose to borrow for yield in any of the next year and the 2 years beyond that, that would disqualify us from PWLB?
That's correct. So we have to disclose to government every year our capital strategies, including this report. And Graham, as section 151, has to declare, and Graham will actually comment on that.
But, Chairman, I just wondered if I could just alter what you said, which was,
Please do.
In our plan, rather than say we have to borrow for yield, if we're going to buy primarily for yield, regardless of how we're going to fund it, that still scuppers our ability to use PWLB, regardless of whether we've got reserves for it. So the Treasury have gone beyond borrowing as being the sort of constraint here. It's just you can't do it, and if you do, you can't use the PWLB for anything in that plan period, even housing. That's right, isn't it, Peter?
Yes, that's correct. So we literally just get frozen out of PWLB for 3 years, which is the horizon they look at in terms of capital expenditure. But they've been they've been useful in terms of the documents they've put forward, because they said actually as a local authority what they want us to do is to focus our investment on service delivery. And by service delivery, they're saying it's strategic functions such as housing, regeneration type schemes, market failure areas where there's employment, etc. at stake, and also for treasury management financing, so refinancing of existing positions, which is useful for us. Some of the descriptions slightly opaque in some ways, and we've clarified how that interprets through to Waverley within the capital strategy and the asset investment strategy on how we intend to comply with that. We could still have income generating schemes, but they cannot be entirely for yield. They can't primarily be for yield anymore, just to get the income in, as we have done previously on our commercial asset. So we can still get into housing, and housing delivers an income. We can get into regen schemes, which are mixed use type schemes, which allows some cross subsidization and some incidental income, which we can relate to services around whatever the mixed use is. So we're not entirely scuppered in terms of investment. We can make investment still. We just have to be much more focused and aligned to the government policy on that. And that's exactly what these documents are doing for us. And the other key point to make here is that that we've actually in the governance process made it clear that the treasury management investment now is a corporate matter. We don't particularly look at HRA and general fund as separate issues when it comes to, and separate things altogether when it comes to investment. We have to take a corporate view of it because of the rules that we're complying with, and our financing strategies have to be corporate. So that's the gist of the document. I'm happy to discuss aspects of that with you, Chairman.
Thank you. No, that it is, as you say, it's a rather different direction to what we have been used to in the past. I think if I refer you to page 132 of the pack, we have discussed this offline, but I think it would be desirable if the very large increase in general fund borrowing, to put it simply, I appreciate it's actually the CFR, which is important, but we are looking, it seems, according to the table and paragraph 1.2 on page 132, to borrow 48.5 million in 23-24 and 62 million 24-25, which is, in Waverley's terms anyway, unprecedented. So within the strict guidelines of what is not confidential, can you please give some colour as to what that is about?
Certainly, Chairman. So page 132, table 1.2, in 22-23, you can see there's 48.5 million pounds sitting on general fund, which ramps up from 22-23 of just shy of 6. So that's forecasting where we think we could be. So we're signalling here within our treasury strategy where we think our capital expenditure is going to be in cash terms in each of those years. And then you can see in 24-25 it actually goes up to 62, and for the time being it drops back to core program at 3 million. So the makeup of that is so there's Cranley, there's core program, there's Cranley Leisure Centre, which has been to council fairly recently, indicating it's about a 22-ish million pound scheme, which splits over 2 years in terms of cash flow, just saying, okay, build out of that would probably be over that period. There's some mixed use developments in each of those years, totaling just shy of 20 million pounds. There's Waycourt East actually in 22-23, which is already a committed scheme. We're underway with that, and it'll be completed in 22-23. Wayhill Youth Campus, we're expecting that to be built out in by 24-25. What else have we got? And the Burries project is the other key project that sits there. I can't remember how much I put in there for that. Help me out. I think I said about shy of 30 million, 15 million a year for 2 years, about £30 million scheme gross in terms of cash flow. Bearing in mind, we're not looking at net positions here. We're thinking how much we think we're going to physically spend going out the door. Table 1.3 then says, from a treasury management perspective, how we may finance it. But this is only one financing scenario. This is not set in stone. We're not living by this as the Bible. We're thinking potentially this is the resourcing of that at the moment. Obviously, any resourcing will come through a really detailed strategy, considered strategy on a corporate basis, because we'll also be bringing in everything that's going on in housing and the profiling of that spend as well. So that's the makeup of what we think the capital spend is going to be. Now, bearing in mind, we're not committed to all of this. This is us signalling what we think from a treasury perspective we're going to be at. And this is what, if we do go for PWLB borrowing in this time frame, the next 3 years, we have to demonstrate to Treasury that we have thought through the next 3 years in compliance with their requirement to make sure that we're not borrowing in advance of need. So we're not just asking for a big lump of money to put on the markets because the interest rate's going up and we'll benefit from that. We have to have a considered capital program in order to demonstrate it's legitimate. And Graham gets the pleasure of signing off on that. I was pleased about it. Chairman, is that enough on that, or are you needing some more explanation on those?
Oh, that's fine. I think that's thank you. Certainly to be going on with. Councillor Adams.
Sorry, I didn't. You said you're not allowed to borrow from PLB for income generating projects. So would upgrading the leisure centre not be an income generating project? I mean, that's the whole point of it, isn't it?
No, Councillor Adam, what we're not allowed to do is borrow, or we're not allowed to do anything in terms of speculative, effectively what's speculative, just for income. We can't go and buy a commercial property, as we have done in the past, just to get the income to support general fund. That's a no-no. We can invest in anything that's generating income, as long as it's service related. And a leisure centre is service related, and you'd expect it to wash its face in some way financially. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just say, I think this is an excellent report, and I entirely understand the reasons why we've had to write it, or officers have had to write it and write it in this way. And it's something which, as far as I'm concerned, on what I can see and what I know thus far, I'm content with. The only area of concern that I have is on page 108. That's recommendation 3 of the recommendations that are going to the council. I'm particularly concerned with the second recommendation. And I just want to clarify that this recommendation is not open-ended. And that this is something which would come back to full council each year to give this delegation to the executive. I'm tempted to suggest that we might want to reduce the £10 million, which is mentioned there in 2A, but I won't. But I just want to ensure that this is something which will come back each year to full council. Thank you.
Can that be clarified?
Chairman, it's a good recommendation. We'll bring that in.
So is it intended to be an open-ended recommendation?
It wasn't intended any more than it wasn't intended, Chairman. It is the answer. I wrote the recommendation as it stands. It hadn't crossed my mind to bring it back. But if you want to look at it from a risk perspective and to learn as we go, then an annual renewal is probably appropriate.
Chairman, I just think that is a sensible thing to do. In time, maybe we can forget all about that, but I would like to see it come back to full council each year to ensure that full council is happy with it. Thank you.
Any comments from other members?
I'd be inclined to agree with what Councillor Martin is asking for. I think it's a proper governance process to go through.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, there appears to be a general consensus there. Thank you. Does anyone have any specific questions to Peter Vickers on this document? I entirely agree. It was a much more interesting read after I'd done it for the third time and began to get my head around certain aspects of it. The tables, it's been stressed to me, a lot of them are there because we have to show the Treasury in advance what our plans are. And a lot of it is risk-based. I refer in particular to the table at paragraph 2.30 on page 138, which, and a point I've raised with Peter, is what happens to the interest cost of these large borrowings? Because although it's a corporate approach to debt, it does look to me in that indicator 7 financing costs that we still would allocate the interest cost to the appropriate part of corporate Waverley. Can we just confirm that, please?
Sure, Chairman. So the reason it's split in that way is because under the Prudential Code, our CFR is actually in two parts. It's General Fund and HRA. There are some slightly separate regulations for each one of those.
But am I right to think that going forward, the HRA accounts will still see the interest it is, if you like, attributed to their debt? The interest cost attributed to their debt will still be their cost.
Yes, that's correct, Chairman.
Thank you. Has anyone got anything else? And if not, shall we note these recommendations with approval, with the our own recommendation that authority to the executive should be 1 year at a time to be approved by full council, no doubt at the February budget meeting.
Madam Chairman, can I also, Chair, I think Treasury Management is probably a very underthanked area. Can I just propose that we actually say, I think we owe a debt of gratitude to particularly the Treasury Management team, and the things that we ask them to do are pretty challenging. And I think they've done over the years that I've been around a very good job. And I'd just like to perhaps maybe we should say we record our thanks, the thanks of this committee to the Treasury Management team for all that they've done. Thank you. And including a very good report.
Is everyone happy with that? Good. Thank you very much indeed. You're very hard to hear. Maybe just as well. The relative precision of the 3 big financial items to the service plans. And I'm entirely sure who's going to be leading on this, or are each of the heads of service going to go rapidly through their set of service plans? Oh, is Nora? Nora, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Very quick word of introduction. So in front of you, members, you have 3 service plans for the next financial three-year rolling period. For business transformation, that will be covered by David Allen, followed by finance and property covered by Peter Vickers, and then onto the policy and governance that will be covered by Robin Taylor. The plans that you are seeing are in majority the similar plans that we proposed last year with the ongoing service as usual actions. However, the heads of service will be highlighting to you any areas of major change and the key areas that we'll be focusing going forward in the year. So without delaying any further, I will just pass on to David Allen, who will introduce his service plan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as Nora has said, we were given a brief earlier today to keep this to 2 to 3 minutes and to focus on the main changes to the service plan and the top objectives. So that is what I'll do. And I did get your comments earlier on, Chairman, about amending some of the wording in a couple of the entries. So I'll look to do that also. So the main changes, you won't be surprised to hear, is around the kind of new post-COVID working environment. We haven't yet reached a new normal because we were just getting there, and then Omicron came along, and that's proved to be a bit of a hiatus. So we'll just have to see how things bedding in the next few months, but clearly office redesign and booking systems and the IT changes and working with Peter's team on marketing space on the second floor are all items that will be accommodated by that post-COVID working. We've also got some changes to the business transformation programme that's quite different from last year, and they may change again as we move forward with the Guildford collaboration. In terms of our top objectives, I've got 4 which appear at various places throughout the service plan. Earlier on, we talked about cyber activity, and that is absolutely critical for us because that's continue to increase, and it's just a daily battle. You'll notice from the trade press from time to time, other councils do fall foul of this, and the cyber attack successful, and then they're then disabled sometimes for months at a time whilst they rebuild their systems. So of course we're investing and doing what we can to prevent that from happening, and that's one of our primary concerns and my number 1 risk, I would say. Channel shift and automation, which was in last year's service plan, but that's kind of really bedding in. We're doing lots of work on builds.
Forgive me, could you actually use the reference number, the BT with a number after it, so we know which one you're actually looking at?
Right, hold on a second. So I was just talking about IT and cyber. So that was BT 5.4 for that one. And the channel shift one is BT 7.1. The next one's kind of section outcome 11, 12 and 13, the business transformation reviews that are now underway. So that is another major objective. And the final one, recruitment, appears in several places, both in engineering and in the IT sections. And why this is a top objective is because we are finding that the fields when we're recruiting to new posts are getting increasingly smaller, and re-advertising is becoming more frequent. So that is why I'm including that amongst my top objectives. And I think I'll leave it there, Chair.
Sorry, I didn't catch the reference to the last action. Which one was it when you were dealing with difficulty in hiring people?
Well, it appears in more than one place because it appears for different services. So we've got BT 5.2 refers to recruitment, as does BT 8.4, which are the more technical areas, but it does actually drift into other services as well, although it's not actually in the service plan.
Thank you. Any questions from members for David Adam?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are some very good areas that we've been directed to. This is a very comprehensive document, and thank you for it. My area of concern relies on something which I'm getting increasingly annoyed about, and that's the move to paperless, the paperless office. Might I draw members' attention to BT 5.6 on page 172. That's the last item there, which is ensuring members are provided and supported with appropriate technology to enable them to discharge their duties effectively. And it's talking later on across the page about members' ability to operate effectively, not being compromised, or maybe it will be compromised, and wanting member feedback. This member feedback is to say, I would like to add an extra point to that particular action or output, which continues on and reads as follows: while respecting the reasonable wishes of those members who wish to discharge their responsibilities using Waverley provided printed or paper copies of agenda papers for their meetings. I just feel that in the preparation for this meeting, almost all the members of this committee have used their paper copies to great effect. The idea of my little Epsom printer chuntering away for several hours to provide the copies that I would need is unreasonable. And many of us have used paper copies for many years. I worked in the IT industry professionally all my life and witnessed the wish to go to a paperless office, and it was never achieved. But I have to say, I find it very difficult to work with long documents adequately and to prepare for meetings if they're not on paper. Thank you.
Thank you. One comment I have, are there behind these documents for performance plans? Because they say what you're going to do. They don't say how you're going to do it or how you're going to measure whether you've done it. David, can you comment on that aspect?
Well, these two will appear in people's personal targets in their appraisal, and in that way we kind of are able to sort of track the progress of the various objectives, as well as Nora's performance regime, where we each quarter have to complete our kind of comments on how we're doing it as regards each of the objectives.
I mean, the personal appraisal will obviously look at the individual's contribution, but where these are, I think most of the time, team-based objectives, and I can understand the difficulty of spending all your time measuring, but what is there done and how often is it done to see whether or not each of these actions or outputs is actually on track?
I think we have to do it quarterly, don't we, Nora? You regularly write to me asking me to fill in the boxes, so I think it's
that is. Yes, that is correct, Chair. So the service plan progress monitoring is featured in our quarterly performance reporting. So once a quarter, I liaise with the teams. We go over their service objectives and we look at the exception basis. So we look at the ones that are not performing well, and we ask for the feedback, and that feedback is always included in the performance report with the additional narrative, what we are doing on the actions which are underperforming. So that this is our mechanism that we have in place.
Thank you. So does that go to the SMT?
That goes to SMT, and then it comes to ONS committees and also is being seen and reviewed by the executive.
Thank you. Right. Councillor Adams.
Quite often we used to have coloured notification on these various projects, so that anything that was on target was green, anything that was slipping a bit was yellow, and everything that was missing its target was red. Is that sort of thing possible to do?
So just coming back on that point, Chair, so within the performance report under service planning section, we do break down the actions and assess them in the RAG rating, as Councillor Adams mentioned, green for those that are on track, and yellow for those which are off track, but we are handling them, and red ones for those that need immediate escalation as well. So we do look at them in through that prism, I suppose, and act on them accordingly as well.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm conscious of the time. I'm probably about 10 minutes on business transformation, important topic as it is. Has anyone else got any comments? If not, David, thank you for your contribution. We now move on to finance and property services, which is Peter Vickers.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a quick canter through really what's going on the ground really in my service plans. So Revs and Bens service, revenues and benefits service, so F2.2. We're literally at the end now of completing the transformation project. Both of those teams have been under for the last couple of years. Part of the process was implementing a self-service portal on the Civica software that we use to manage both of those services workloads. Which means that we're now in a position where we can integrate into David's transformation in the central customer service team, all the front end business end of the revenue service. So that's a giant leap forward, and it's really great to get to the end of that project. So that's F2.2 and F4.1. F3.2, central controls team. So that's part of the transformation that's happened in that area. We've pulled out all the key governance controls around reporting and data management into one central place, one central team. That's not just for those two services, that's actually going to be corporate. So all the financial information, other than the work that Rosie's team deals with on financial management, will run through that particular team. So all the checks and balances and key reconciliations of our financial systems. So that's underway. That'll be completed in the next financial year. F3.4, we are establishing a debt recovery team that at the moment we have out with Epsom, with Reigate, Banstead. That's coming back in-house as of 1st of April. We're re-establishing the team on a basis that we can expand and get some economies of scale from other authorities, because the debt recovery service is quite vanilla in that respect. It can lend itself to some such economies with decent processes. In the finance team, there's the financial infrastructure that's being revamped to make sure we're really efficient. We're using the latest technologies in our financial transactions. So that's F4.2. We're replacing our Adelante system with Civica Pay. That will happen literally over the next financial year. It takes a little bit of time to bring that in. It's quite a huge process to change the flows of information through a cash merge system. A big benefit of that is there's a cost reduction, but also it brings a whole new lot of functionality that we don't currently have in terms of our ability to transact financially with residents of the borough. F5.2 is embedding the financial code within the work that we do across the organisation corporately. So we've done a fair bit of work on that, understanding the implications of the detail of that code. It's now rolling out over the next year, some of the governance around that. Asset management, F7.1. So that's implement the revised capital strategy and the asset investment strategies that we've talked about in depth this evening. The focus is on asset that we own in borough or can acquire in the borough that's mixed development, regen housing, market failure type schemes, and developing those to the council's advantage, including our MTFP targets. So that's it. So that's all I really have to bring. There's plenty of that to keep us going.
Thank you. On 7.1, is that wording completely up to date, would you think? I mean, increasing overall income, but you can't do it just feel. I mean, can we still realistically seek to invest to end up with increased income, even if we're ticking the important boxes which we have to now?
So it is, Chairman, in respect, and I'm actually saying in the sentence there that it's so in line with the MTFP, property investment strategy and HM Treasury, not for yield. So we do have a target still in the MTFP for additional income. It just isn't income directly through investment for yield. It's incidental to the mixed use schemes, for instance.
No, thanks. I mean, yes. Primarily for yield, solely for yield, that is now out. But if you would hope to get some yield when you're investing for one of the permitted purposes.
That's correct, Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Martin.
I would just like to say I admire the phrasing in F7.2. I love the language there. It's as clear as mud. Thank you.
It's well written then.
Sir Humphrey would be proud of you. Right, thank you very much indeed. Shall we move on to the most populous one of all, which is policy and governance. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you, Chairman. So sticking to the format requested, key changes from the previous year's plan, I'll just highlight 3 changes. Firstly, as I'm sure you won't be surprised, The reference in the previous year's plan that related to a general discussion across Surrey about local government structures has been replaced in this plan with a more specific objective related to the Guildford-Waverley collaboration. Secondly, this plan contains.
Sorry, Robin, could you, if you're referring to a particular item?
Yes, sorry, that's outcome 24, page 197. This plan contains a renewed effort to focus on customer service and performance improvement within the service. So that's internal customer KPIs as well as external customer KPIs. And that's outcome 21, page 196, specifically 21.2. Finally, this plan reflects the increased importance of promoting staff and councillor wellbeing. The reference to the council's commitment is not new. Previously, you've seen the reference to the charter that the council signed up to, but over the past 2 years, we've moved from that general approach to a very specific and comprehensive programme of wellbeing, particularly for staff. And that's become a core part of what we've had to do in response to the pandemic, but it's not just a pandemic-related issue. So there's more of that in there, and that is on outcome 15.1, page 192. In terms of the service's top objectives, in my view, I don't know if this is cheating or not, but I'm going to mention business as usual throughout the plan because it is the sort of service where the business as usual actions are really important and they are critical. So just to highlight a few: provision of legal advice, committee administration, HR support, change management, employee relations, internal and external communications, and maintaining the electoral register. These are all business as usual items, but they are all critical to the service. In terms of one-off and cross-organisation objectives that are particularly important in the coming year, the first I've already mentioned, which was that performance management, both internally and externally. One thing to pick up there is the close monitoring of the land searches turnaround times, where I've brought in the previous quarterly reports, you'll know that the performance really did take a knock due to a number of factors during the year. And although that performance is now recovering, it's critical that we keep a close eye on that. And that's 21.2 within the table. There's a lot for this service to do to support the Guildford-Waverley collaboration. That's outcome 24, as I said. So we'll be focusing on the inter-authority agreement in the coming year, focusing on HR matters, beginning with a shared senior management team. And obviously there's a lot for the HR team here to do, and also working collaboratively with the Guildford HR team on that. We also need to spend a lot of time looking at the joint governance arrangements that will be put in place to make this collaboration effective. And also clearly there are joint communications efforts to be done both internally and externally. So all of that will be a key area of focus within the coming year. And finally, 15.2, and this relates to some of the comments that David made. We have our Where Work Happens project. I'm leading on the culture work stream of that. It's really important that we continue to focus on that. So we will be looking at how managers lead in a hybrid environment, how we manage performance in a hybrid environment, how we maintain a team spirit within the staff workforce, how we overcome silo working in that hybrid environment, and also again, how we'll be looking after people's well-being. The only other thing I want to mention is the constitution review that will continue to take place. I haven't got the reference for that in front of me, but I can look it up in a moment, Chairman. Those are the things I wanted to focus on. Thank you.
Someone's bleeping. Members, any questions or comments?
Could I just say, there is a great deal here to try and take in, and on top of all the other information that we had to look at for this meeting. I have to say I haven't put perhaps the degree of scrutiny into this that I should have done, but it's a comprehensive document and it's a very wide-ranging document. I think the proof will be in the eating, and we'll measure that as we go along. But it seems to me to be a pretty fair document. Thank you.
Well, it certainly is it's a very large document with a very large number. I'm glad to see that efficiency plays its part, because the compliance section was obviously borrowed from business transformation. In fact, it's a serious thing that it's common to all service areas.
It's common to all of the service plans.
If there are no more comments, I suggest we thank the officers for their service plans and move on to the next item. Sorry.
I think Councillor Martin did have a suggestion for an amendment to one of the actions. I maybe not an entirely serious one, but I don't know if people wanted to formally.
Well,
agree
Chairman, I
with
just
that.
wonder whether that, I do note that the degree of use to which councillors put paper and this business that we're just going to get rid of paper, that's fine. And I'm just very opposed to it. And I just think it's, many of us have relied on paper for a long time. I find it very difficult to look at large documents on a screen. And it's a serious point that I do not wish to see us moving entirely paperless. Thank you.
I think we've got your message. Sorry, is this germane?
I just wish to clarify that that's absolutely not the objective, certainly not to do it without any consultation. And the survey that's gone around to members really is just to enable us to understand what would help members better transition away from exclusively paper in an environment where we print a lot and spend a lot on post. If there's any way we can help, that's what we're trying to do here. And that's what that 30k is for.
Yeah, I think I'd bear in mind that if I'm reading it correctly, the total cost of the printing of paper is about 10,000 a year, which, while hardly trivial compared to other things we spend money on, isn't huge either. I mean, there's obviously an issue. There's a generational issue. As time goes on, more people will be interested only in using screens. But for the moment, anyway, I think you're stuck with a number of us who are of an older generation. And I will say, although I'm reasonably mathematical, I find it much easier to look at large documents and to use a highlighter and a piece of paper. Thank you. Councillor Howard.
Only just to say, I think there'll be costs that haven't been taken account of because the little laptops that we've been given are very difficult to have to be able to scrutinize. I agree with Peter Martin. We couldn't possibly scrutinize properly on those tiny little screens we've got. So, and I don't think the investment in new proper screens for councillors to be able to do that properly has been fully taken into account.
Because it's a very fair point. The screens have to be usable. Councillor Adam.
Yeah, my comment was somewhat similar. I think we'd have to really increase the IT support, to be honest, on an ongoing basis, because things are changing so fast, and almost each month you find something that worked last month doesn't work now, and you have to ring up IT support and get it to reset and get it all working again. So if you're going to do away with paper and have these little screens, I mean, the most recent one was I had everything on my same laptop. And then suddenly, about a fortnight ago, nothing that came from Waverley would be allowed on my laptop. So I've had to, get one of these. I mean, it's not unusual because I've worked before where the business has had to supply me with a second machine. But the fact that it just changed and suddenly it wasn't working and had to come in here, reorganize a couple of things. And it's not the first time. I have to come in quite often and get them to reset stuff.
I think, to be fair, there is obviously a willingness to invest appropriately to get this to work. But equally, one shouldn't underestimate the sheer teething troubles. And I'm afraid I also tried to use the small Waverley machine and found it a very difficult thing to use. Anyway, enough of that. I think the message has been given. We now have reached item 11, which is the review of complaints closed in 2021. I propose to do this on an exceptions basis. Do we have anyone presenting it? Sue Petzel. Sue, hello there.
Hi. Yes. Very brief introduction, Chairman. This is the annual report that we present to members, giving a summary of the complaints that have been received in the previous year, performance in responding to those complaints, and where applicable, lessons learned. Briefly, the the report covers the number of complaints closed at each level and the percentage and percentages for each service. That's in paragraphs 4.2. There are two tables under 4.2, as you will see from 4.3, 64% of all complaints closed in 2020-21 resolved at level 1, compared with 75% the previous year. So that's a slight decrease in result there. Housing operations received the highest number of complaints, a total of 106, but that is a slight decrease from the previous year. And generally speaking, every year, the largest number of complaints concerning housing operations, mainly to do with responsive repairs service and property maintenance. Paragraph 5 looks at our performance in responding to complaints. We aim to respond to level 1 complaints within 10 working days and level 2 complaints within 15 working days. And we have a 95% target for both those levels. To date, we have never yet met that target corporately. And as you'll see from paragraph 5.2, 84% of all complaints were closed within our target timescales in 2020-21. So we still have got a bit of work to do to try and improve our performance in that area. We also give a breakdown of the performance for each level in 5.2. Then moving on, paragraph 6 sets out the outcome of complaints. That's subjective really, but the decision is taken of whether the complaints are upheld, partly upheld or not upheld by the service complaints administrators. And as you will see in 2021, 68% of complaints were not upheld and 10% were partly upheld and 22% were upheld. There's a brief paragraph on remedying complaints, which we try to follow the guidance given by the local government and social care ombudsman, and often that will concern an apology, but on rare occasions we sometimes pay financial compensation. And then lesson learned from complaints are set out in the annex. That's just an example of some of the lessons learned. One of the most important parts for us of dealing with complaints is actually to look at where things have gone wrong in the way we deliver our services and taking swift action to put those right. So they are an important tool for learning lessons and hopefully improving our services. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Anyone? I have a couple, but other members first. Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Just on paragraph 4.3, 64% of all complaints were closed at level 1 in 2021, compared with 75% the previous year. You said it was just a small decrease. It's quite a substantial decrease. I just wondered what you think the reasons for that were. Thank you.
It's difficult. It's difficult to say, really. It depends on the service area that's being complained about. It may be that we've had more planning complaints. Planning complainants tend to pursue their complaints to level 2 more than any other service areas, partly because they concern issues that are probably not are actually are relating to things we've actually done wrong and can put right. They're more expression of concern that we fail to take, or from the complainant's point of view, we fail to take into account their objections to a particular planning application, those sorts of things. So they do tend to, more planning complaints go to level 2 than other complaints, but I can't really, to be honest, I can't give a specific answer to that question.
Councillor Neil, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. May I just comment on the planning and economic development lines, please? I can understand that you're likely to get a lot of complaints on housing and delivery because the plumbing doesn't work and all that sort of thing. But planning and economic development is a professional service. I guess some of these complaints are IT related as well, and maybe that's holds things up.
Could you just comment on our feeling about the planning complaint level, please?
I don't think there have been many complaints about the way in which our IT has been operating. So certainly not for the previous year. I really do think it's very difficult to say why, you know, there has been so many planning complaints. Other than that, it's not a situation that's unique to Waverley. I think in most local authorities have quite high planning complaint numbers. So it is really, it's difficult for me to say, I have to say, but it's more the sort of complaints about neighbourhood notification and failure to take into account people's observations about planning proposals, and also querying measurements and sort of technical issues. So that's my overall impression for the complaints that we received in the last year or so.
Chairman, if I may, on the planning complaints, I do understand the point. You know, it's a professional service, and it is, but by definition, you do have applicants, and a number of those applicants may be dissatisfied with the outcome. And I do think that feeds into some of the numbers, if not all of the numbers. It is the type of service where you have dissatisfied customers because they didn't receive the outcome that they may have been hoping for, even if that outcome was fairly reached.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. And you see from the examples given from the Ombudsman's reports, that planning was the major part. Two quick questions. Am I right to think the reason why environment scores quite highly as well is because of complaints about bin collections?
Yes, yes.
And more importantly, when you say lessons are learned from the place, and that's obviously important, how is this knowledge actually recorded, and how are procedures changed if a lesson is learned which suggests the procedure is imperfect? What actually
lessons learned are recorded on a complaints database. We've actually moved over to a more sophisticated database with effect from this year. And when we close a complaint, well, at level 2, it's my role to actually to review what has gone wrong, and then those lessons learned and any actions that need to be taken are raised with the appropriate head of service, and then it's up to the service area to ensure that action is taken to address problems that have arisen. But I do usually do quite a, where there are lessons to be learned, I do give quite a detailed report to the head of service, and they can take it from there.
Well, I'll just ask a question, not for answer now, it's probably difficult, but do you get any evidence of, shall we say, lessons apparently being learned, but not actually causing better practice? Because in a different role in my earlier life, I think making sure that departments took on board new tacit knowledge, if you like, in a form they could actually access and use was quite difficult. And I wonder if that applies to Waverley as well, or other local authorities. You may have done all that you can, but what matters is it actually has effect in the service areas. And how can you guarantee that?
Well, it's not something that I can do myself. I have to rely on the individual heads of service and their colleagues to actually take those issues forward. And I mean, my experience is that a good deal of time is spent on issues that do go, or matters that go wrong, and how they can be rectified. But it can be quite an uphill struggle. There's, truthfully.
I take the point. Thank you.
Chairman, if I can just add to that point very briefly, it comes back to what was said earlier, that the quarterly performance reports, which include this detailed performance data on complaints, as well as coming into the member arena to committees, also come into the senior management team. And there's a joint discussion always about the complaints data that comes in.
Thank you. You're reasonably confident that these things do actually stick where they need to stick, which is at the service area.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Good, thank you. Right, agenda item again. Are we happy with that? Anyone else wish to?
Just under the housing operation, because yes, certainly I've been getting more complaints coming to me because of problems, but a lot of it seems to be with contractors, and I mean that's a general issue for everybody at the moment, getting skilled people to come. So is that part of the problem, or do we have in-house, or, but what do you think is the problem particularly there at the moment?
Do you want me to answer that too?
Hugh, do you want to comment on that?
Chair, is it okay that I answer that?
Yes, please.
Yes, so as Sue has said, the majority of the complaints around housing is around the contractors. You've got to remember we have many interactions with our tenants, with our customers, and that's why there's a high level of complaints. I mean, our aim is to get it right first time, but we don't always succeed, and the contractors don't succeed. There are challenges because around delays in getting repairs done, and that is related to the difficulty of recruiting labour to do the work the contractors find. But then there is also a breakdown in processes, and it's also a breakdown in communication. And that's the key message in many of these complaints is communication. People understand why things can go wrong, but what they really find difficult is communication. So that is a key learning from many of the complaints. Just to go back on what you're asking Sue, I mean, we take Sue's reports from the lessons learned, very important. We set up ways to implement what she's recommended and monitor to ensure that things get done. And we actually use them again to manage our contractors, highlight how things have gone wrong with them. So this data is used. And the other reason I would suggest that our figures are high is that I encourage our customers to make complaints. So on a regular basis, I do write to them confirming what the complaints process is and how things will be resolved. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you very much.
That's very useful. Thank you.
Right, thank you. If that's enough on item 11, let's get to agenda item 12. Who's leading on this? Is this you, Robin?
I think it's me, Chairman, again. This again is an annual report that comes to overview and scrutiny, and it's a report in two parts. It concerns the complaints that were made about Waverley's services to the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman in 2021, and we receive an annual report from the Local Government Ombudsman to set out their thoughts on the complaints that have been received about our local authority. And the report contains the Ombudsman's annual letter as an annex. The statistics in the report on Local Government Ombudsman complaints are taken from the annual letter, and paragraph 4.4 actually looks at the number of complaints and inquiries received about Waverley's services over the last 4 years. And then beneath that, there's the decisions made by the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman. As years have gone by, the Ombudsman has actually taken a much more selective approach, and they only investigate complaints in depth where there is they feel that there is some good evidence that there's been injustice to the complainant. As you will see from the decisions taken for the last 4 years, the numbers have been sort of reasonably stable, so there's not a significant increase or decrease. But the annex 2 gives a summary of the outcome of the 4 detailed investigations that were carried out by the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman. And then part 2 of the report concerns complaints about Waverley's landlord and leasehold services, and those are now looked at by the Housing Ombudsman Service. The Housing Ombudsman Service don't actually produce an annual letter, and so the statistics in this part of the report are taken from our own records. But again, as you'll see from paragraphs 5.5, in 2020-21, the Housing Ombudsman closed investigations in 4 complaints, and we've got a summary in Annex 3 about the outcome of those complaints. And in each case, we were ordered by the Housing Ombudsman to pay compensation. So I think that's really all I need to say on that report, but I'm again happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I think the one comment I'll make, and it's shared by my vice chairman, this letter was actually sent out in July, and I think not one but two overview and scrutiny committees have passed since. If the usual arrangement is we see it first and then pass on any comments to the executive, then can I suggest that we see it in the meeting after it comes out this summer? It would actually be no bad thing if we had that at a slightly lighter meeting than at this one when we've got so much else. That's my only comment. Anyone else?